We'll all be dead by then, but so we won't care. The tools are getting better to express yourself. Technology is becoming less of a limiting factor in terms of the games that you want to make, in terms of being able to communicate the ideas that you have. And we're getting better as designers. We're learning more about what works and what doesn't work. It's not just one guy in his bedroom kind of fiddling around. There's a lot of psychological research, a lot of people thinking about it more deeply and more intensely about what games are and how they work. And that's incredibly exciting as well. And the last thing is that kind of if you don't try to innovate, or if you don't try new things, or if you don't try to kind of figure out what works for you, then you'll never know. And that's me.
Thank you very much.
That was it. I apologise for the stuff up. I timed it to 15 minutes yesterday and it all fell apart.
Thank you very much. Next is Jonathan Blow, who was our keynote this morning, and I hope you all enjoyed the keynote. As you heard then, Jonathan Blow is obviously an independent game developer, but also just as importantly, he's been instrumental in getting the industry to realise that there's this massive world of independent ideas being sort of worked on at sort of grassroots level. So he's a co-organiser of the Game Tech Conference and founder of the Experimental Gameplay Workshop, which showcases and works on sort of prototypes of young developers. And something that I should have mentioned about Paul is that he's a writer, and all three of the panellists are writers, so they've all got some great ideas about language, and I think that came out in the talk.
I used language, that's for sure.
So please welcome Jonathan Blow for the second time.
So my pre-prepared statement is that Gears of War has active reload, which is a really cool feature, and if every mainstream game did at least one thing that was that new, then the mainstream game industry would be like this continual font of like innovation, and it would be awesome. So I don't think you can bag on Gears of War that way.
It wasn't me, it was Alan Toscan.
But you agreed. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's like 3 aspects of innovation or something like that. One, innovation as triviality, and what do I mean by that? So several years ago, I started this thing, the Experimental Gameplay Workshop, and I was thinking about what it means to innovate, because we would invite every year people doing all these new and wacky kind of games to come and present them, right? And the prevailing attitude, even at mainstream game developer conferences at that time, people were kind of cynical, and they're all like, lack of innovation is really an industry-wide problem, and games that don't innovate suck, like a game has to innovate to be good. And that, after the amount of thinking about innovation that I had done, these statements didn't really resonate with me. Like, they didn't make sense, and I wanted to explore why. And that sort of thought is where these 3 points of innovation have come from. So I'm talking about innovation as triviality. Let's think about works that we consider great in other media, like books or film or music or things like that. Sometimes there's innovation in those works, right? So I saw this movie, Children of Men, this year. It was really good. It was a really emotional movie. They were very innovative with the cinematography. They had tons of tricky things that they were doing, but it worked in that film because it served to reinforce the mood and the setting and just all sorts of things about the movie, right? So that's a case in which innovation helped make a work deeper. However, by no means is innovation required in any of these forms for a work to be great or even good, right? If you're writing a novel, you don't have to innovate about the form of a novel in order for it to be, received by critics or the public or anybody as a good book, right? You can just write a good book with compelling characters or that talks about an interesting subject. There doesn't really have to be anything that we would call in the game industry innovative, right? And why is that? Well, the greatness comes from inside the work, right? Maybe it has something to do with what I was talking about this morning about the why behind the work, right? The author's motivation. The greatness does not come from the innovation, absolutely. Now, we're actually, so if the innovation is in a work and it's kind of arbitrary, it's just there to be something new, like those quotes at the beginning would seem to imply, like, oh, I want to make a new game, so it's got to do something new. If that's not grounded in the purpose of the work, then it's a certain kind of innovation that we're pretty familiar with. It's not very deep, and it's there just to distract the audience into giving you money. Hollywood is very good at this kind of innovation. It's called a gimmick, right? So here's this movie, Speed. It's about a bus that'll explode if it ever goes slower than 55 miles an hour, right? Oh my God, nobody's ever made a movie with that plot before. That's innovation, but it didn't make a great film, right? It made a cheesy, stupid movie that just exists to take your money. So I really take issue with this hallowing of innovation that takes place in indie circles, which may seem paradoxical because oftentimes I am all about innovation and I run this event that's all about innovation. But yeah, so innovation can sometimes produce things that are kind of fun experiences, but they're not necessarily the deepest, lastingest experiences, right? But we often seem to be aspiring to that. Aspiring to the gimmick instead of the depth, and that's not necessarily a very good thing. Now, in the games business, though, I mentioned those quotes at the beginning, there is this pervasive feeling that we need innovation for games to be good. Why is that, right? The reason why is because the games right now that don't have innovation in them aren't deep enough to hold our interest, right? If you release the same game 5 or 6 times in a row with just different characters or different settings, we will get bored of it. And that's because the medium of games has not matured enough to address us in our human condition, to give us things that we really care about, right? So the innovation is kind of like a shiny thing that distracts us from the fact that this isn't really that deep of a work and gives us something new to pay attention to, and that's good enough for 1 or 2 games, and then a new game with a new innovation comes along, right? And we get stringed along that way. So I don't like that. I don't like that games aren't that deep, and I want to solve that. But fortunately, innovation is good at solving that problem, which brings me to part 2. Innovation is territorial claim. I'm going to hook in a little bit with the previous presentation and my awesome graphical illustration skills here. So this blue thing, this blob, not including the axes, is the space of all possible games that could ever be created. Every game is a point in that space. And then the little green area is the set of all games that we have made or understand how to make, right? And it's a small subset of that space. And maybe as games get deeper, we'll expand further out into that area, right? What is the role of innovation? Say somebody makes a wacky game that, Katamari Damacy was a game that wasn't very much like the games that came before, and that serves as a little green dot that gets cast out into that space some distance away from the territory that we already know, right? And once we've got a few of those dots out there, then we can fill that in with other games that aren't quite as innovative but interpolate between what we know and the innovative thing, right? There have been some other Katamari-esque games. There have been some web games that are simpler. They're all like that. There's that Diblob game made by some students. So we're kind of, that area got staked out by one game, and now it's being filled in. So innovation helps us explore this territory and expand the territory, which you would think would be valuable, right? But the greatness of the medium, or our power to feel things communicated to us by games, doesn't come from the act of making this bigger, right? Because the act of making this bigger just means that at some intellectual level we know how to make more kinds of games, right? Where the greatness and power of the game comes from is from exploiting the points already inside this territory, right? To make things that can touch us and be meaningful to us, right? So innovation is cool because it opens up more green territory for us to farm and make a lot more possibilities for new games that can be more meaningful to us. But there's no sin in just farming the green area that we have right now and making touching and deep games out of that. An everyday shooter, which I talked about this morning, I would firmly put in that space. It's not innovative in terms of form, but it really feels deep in a way that 8-way shooters historically have not. All right. So, and I would say that we need to farm this territory that we already know about in order to show the potential of games, to society and help guide their development. All right. So my last point, which is shorter and not well thought out, because this is sort of a new thing that I'm thinking about this year, is innovation as encouraging a declarative mindset. And what the hell does that mean? So a declarative mindset is when you approach game design in this way, where you say, I've got this great idea for a game. This is exactly how it's going to work, man. I spec'd out the design doc, and we're going to go program it. And if something doesn't end up working out the same as a design doc, that's like a